Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week by week basis. And today's topic of discussion is education. And on the conversation about education, I want to keep the conversation going around toxic and abusive profiles and how to catch them before things get out of hand. And so in an initial video, I talked a bit about my own no contact journey. It's been 5.5 years since I went no contact with my immediate and extended family members. And I'm feeling very happy with where I am in life right now, but so much growth and learning that came from those experiences that I definitely want to share because I want to make sure that people who themselves feel isolated and feel as though there's very little room to move and there's very little possibility of escape out of an abusive situation. I want them to hear my story so that they feel empowered, so that they feel encouraged to do the same things that I did. And again, it's not an easy path by any means, but it's a path that I'm so happy that I've taken. But there are things that I've learned along the way. And I think that what happens is there are things that I've learned the hard way that I would love to just share with you so that no one else needs to learn these things the hard way either. And so I think growing up in a narcissistic family dynamic, it made me much more tolerant to behaviors that people who grew up in healthy settings would otherwise recognize would be like toxic and signals there's something wrong. And so as a result of that, I had built myself an ecosystem of individuals who were really very toxic, who did not have my best intentions in mind, and where I was completely oblivious because my threshold for abuse was much too high. And so because my threshold for abuse was much too high, it gave a lot of people a lot of access to me, which then therefore turned into leverage to create smear campaigns and have them exacerbate given the situation that took place with my mother. So again, like the smear campaign itself initiated on my mother, but there were a few other people who rode that wave. And as a result, it became a perfect storm. I had mentioned, and I will put the video up here, that I had been stalked by my mentor, who was a professor, I'm not sure if he still is, at University of Toronto, who was part of my master's in business administration program and also a partner at one of the big three firms, who was very much a believer in Project Purpose. And so that interest was an interest that I had kept at arm's length. Like he had come to visit me when I lived in France. A few people from my program came to visit me while I lived at France. And it is those people who also took advantage of the smear campaign that my mom had initiated to have it exacerbate and have people's perceptions around me change because I wasn't there to physically defend myself. And so he was one of those individuals, but there are other individuals as well. And so there was this couple that I had met in the program. And so they were from South America. And while we were in the program, we just talked about like differences in cultures and whatnot. And they had invited me to come visit them in South America. I had gone to visit them and I thought it was very much an innocent invitation. I really didn't think that much of it. But during that invitation, there was an advance that was made, right? It was an advance that caught me off guard. It was not something that I had anticipated or expected, but I didn't put too much into it because I completely blocked that advance. I was like, this is not something that I'm interested in. Like, I understand if you two as a couple, this is something that you'd be okay to engage in, but this isn't my cup of tea. I felt that that was respected. And we maintained contact. It definitely gave me an opportunity to see their culture, to see their way of living, so on and so forth. And they had invited me to go back. They had invited me to live actually in South America. I had denied that request. I was not interested and still am not interested in living in South America. And then so what happened was I decided to move to France. And so a lot of people were not happy with this choice. It wasn't just my mother and her family who weren't happy with my choice. Like there are a few people who thought it wasn't the right choice for me to make. But it was my own personal life, of course, it's my own decision. And I decided to move to France. And so while I was in France, after the first 6 months, I had people check in wanting to know how I was doing. Scott being one of those individuals who ended up stalking me when I ended up moving back from France to Canada during the pandemic period. And then another couple who came to visit me. And so in this visit, things were different because at this point I was hosting them in my own home and they had made a secondary advance. And so this time things went left because for me, I had already established a boundary. I had already mentioned that it wasn't something that I was interested in doing. And it was very uncomfortable because not only my home in France, I did have an extra guest room in my home, but the way that the apartment that I was in France was set up was that you had to go through my room to get to the guest room. And so it created a really uncomfortable situation situation. And because of that, when they ended up leaving, I decided to cut ties. I decided I did not want to maintain friendship with these individuals. And they recognized that because I completely blocked them and all of my devices. I recognized that this was really not a friendship at all. Like, it was under the pretense of a friendship. They definitely wanted more. And this was as a couple wanted more. For me, like, to each their own. And I'm very much a live and let live human being. But if I say that this is not a line that I want to cross and then that boundary keeps getting tested, then obviously that becomes problematic, not just for me, but for everyone. But for me, I decided I wasn't going to touch base with them, and that friendship did not exist anymore. And so what ended up happening was I told a few of our mutual friends what took place. And I think they caught wind of the fact that this time around I was talking about how uncomfortable and how just inappropriate I felt the situation was, especially because it was a couple, one of them being male, I'm a female who's living alone. And if I said no the first time I was visiting you, and of course if I'm inviting you to visit me in France, I'm not expecting the same situation to come up, and it had. And so this time I decided to cut ties with these individuals. Except rather than them tell people that I had decided to cut ties and did not want to maintain a friendship with them, they maintained that they were still friends with me. And then they started rumors about how I was behaving when they came to visit me in France to get ahead of the narrative, because they knew that I was telling people what actually took place while we were in France. And so when I think about the 2020 year and how it became a perfect storm that I was getting hit at all sides, it was literally all of these narratives that were happening in their own silo that took on a different life of its own because of the explosion that took place when I went no contact with my mother. And so I think it is a lesson for me because I was much too open to friendships with everyone and anyone. I was very much live and let live. I didn't need you to have the same values as me, the same beliefs as me to be friends with me. Like, for me, it's like, as long as like we respect one another's boundaries, we could be friends. I could be friends with anyone. But I learned the hard way that there are just some people, depending on where their values are, if they're incompatible with your values, then you cannot maintain a friendship with those individuals. One, two, you don't want those individuals to have access to you, because when they have access to you, if you're not doing the things that they want to do, and if they are used to and accustomed to getting their way, then they're going to take that access and abuse it. And that's what ended up taking place. And so not a lot of people ask me about that situation. I think a lot about like how I was so successfully isolated to go through the intimidation and the terrorizing that I was going through, the stalking that I was going through for so long. And I think it's because of two things. One of them was that my threshold for abuse was too high. There's a lot of inappropriate behavior that I didn't nip in the bud because I was just used to abusive behavior to begin with, right? So because of that, like, there's a lot of things that someone would otherwise consider to be problematic, but like for me, it had to escalate to a point where it's very black and white before I would call it out and tell like what my position was on it. I think because of that, like, I think a lot of people had a misconception about me and about what they were able to get away with me because I was quiet for a long time until I wasn't. By then, I think they had done a couple of temperature checks and had already cultivated a wrong perception as to how I would engage and behave when their actual intention became clear. And so now in hindsight, I think to myself, well, I guess they were flags, they were signals. And I think if someone invites you to visit them and before the invitation, they don't let you know what the pretense is or what the context is, if they invite you under false pretenses, then that in and of itself should have been a flag and should have been enough for me to have not gone to visit these individuals in South America. Further and foremost, like, after that took place, I let it go, I let it slide, and I felt like we could maintain friendship platonically. I didn't think that that was going to be an issue. But if someone has a romantic interest in you, whether they're individuals or a single person or in a relationship, and that's kind of how the relationship dynamic works, I think then that someone who maybe had a little bit more wisdom about it, I think I should have had more reservations around what took place than what I did. And I thought that like it could just go back to being a friendship platonic, but I don't think there was a friendship that anyone wanted, right? So I think the friendship was the pretense. And I think that a lot of the times in my past, I allowed people to use friendship as a pretense. And when they asked for what it was they were actually looking for, I just thought we could go back to the friendship, to the pretense, not ever recognizing that the friendship itself never existed. It was just a stepping stone to what they actually wanted. For me, I'm in a relationship. I'm in a very happy relationship. There's no room for those kinds of situations to take place in my life anymore. Like, I wouldn't be in a situation where I would be vulnerable to that kind of targeting. But if someone is confused by what friendship means now moving forward, like then it's just dead out of the water. Like I'm not going to put myself in a position where I think that it's a friendship, but for them it's something else. And because they're not getting what they want, now I'm being subjected to a lot of punitive treatment because they have a hard time dealing with rejection. And that was what I faced not only with my mentor, but with this couple who had first invited me to visit them in South America and who ended up visiting me while I was in France. And I think about these relationships that took advantage of the fact that I was having this falling out with my family and with my mother, who really took things to a different extreme when she realized that I was really going no contact and she was not going to have access to me. I think they took advantage of that opportunity. They saw that I was alone. They saw that I didn't have a network or I didn't have a family support to fall back on. And they really took advantage of trying to isolate me to be able to then punish me or have me or coerce me to do what it was that they were looking to do. And so now I'm much more, I think, reserved when it comes to forming friendships. I take a lot more time than I used to. And I used to be the kind of person where if you smiled at me, I was happy to be friends with you. But I know that that's just opening myself up to being targeted by the wrong people. I think you need to practice patience when it comes to cultivating relationships. Like intentions and motivations are only revealed in time and with time. I think that if you yourself know, if you recognize that you come from an abusive household, then you need to recognize like the things that you have no reaction to, that you're kind of numb to now, that maybe warrant a reaction, so that people aren't pressure testing you, not realizing that you're oblivious to the fact that they're testing your limits, because your limit is much higher than most people. You have a higher threshold for abuse than most people because you grew up in that kind of environment, right? And I think that it's just important to recognize what the spectrum of healthy to unhealthy is by way of what you tolerate. And so I've become much more aware and intentional and mindful about how I craft and maintain my boundaries. I think before, like I felt like if we were friends, it was something I needed to really think about. If we weren't friends, and I was really, really good at articulating my boundaries, articulating my position, but there are just things that I just assumed I wouldn't have to worry about if I was dealing with a friendship. And so those were things that I definitely needed to worry about. Those were all of the different, I think, trigger points for the smear campaigning that took place. First, it was my mother, then it was my mentor, then it was these two individuals, all of them influential in their own right. Like they obviously, my mentor carried influence with his social capital and his positioning. My mother worked within the mental health community, so she abused and leveraged her social capital there. And then this couple, they were part of my, the one gentleman was part of my MBA program. So he leveraged his social capital and also leveraged the fact that people recognized that we were friends, not realizing that we had a horrible falling out when they came to visit me in France. And they tried to get ahead of the narrative by building lies that I'm assuming would resonate with what was taking place with my mother, would, I guess, align. I'm assuming that their lies aligned to what my mother was saying as well. And so I don't know, like, I'll put the story up to what took place by way of the mentorship stalking situation. But all of these, I think I was primed to experience all of these different kinds of abuse because I grew up in a household where emotional, psychological abuse was rampant, right? And only because it was escalating to physical and in ways that are much more insidious than you would think, that I recognized that like I needed to get out and I needed to, part of my postmortem, think about my boundaries and fix them as quickly as possible, so I wasn't constantly creating these cycles of toxic patterns with the people around me, which is what I would consider to be the most of the friendships that I had established while I was living in Canada, right? And so now that I'm here in Europe, I'm trying to do everything differently. I'm trying to do everything in a way where I honor my trauma, I honor the experiences that I had in the past as well. I think I'm doing a good job of that. But I also want to come in here and just talk about the fact that like abuse, when you have been targeted by abuse, if you grow up in abuse, then it creates like this signals, like people who are predatory in any way recognize that there's a part of you that is wounded, that you're still healing, that you're still figuring out, and they really do try to maximize on it. And life doesn't stop happening because you're dealing with one crisis. Like for me, it was a snowball of crises after crisis after crisis. And I was reeling because I was just trying to get my head above the water with the one issue that I was dealing with, but I had to deal with all of the issues at the same time. But I could have mitigated the majority of those issues if I had much clearer boundaries, if I was much more reserved in the kind of behaviors that I accepted. And I think I let things go way too far before I drew the line, to be quite honest. But yeah, all of it is growth and learning now in hindsight. I mean, we know everything in hindsight, right? We know how we would have done things differently, what we would have done differently. But now I recognize that people who have issues with your boundaries, people who offer friendship as a pretense, like all of that is behavior that I consider to be a massive red flag. And it doesn't mean you're going to be subjected to the same level of abuse that I was subjected to, but it does doesn't mean that you just need to keep an eye out. You need to like protect yourself, protect your reputation as well, because a lot of the times if these people don't get what they want and they recognize that you're talking about what actually took place, they're going to try to get ahead of the narrative and twist the narrative as well. And so 2026, Happy New Year to everyone who is watching, is a year where I'm going to be very vocal about the abuse that I've experienced. When no one else is watching, I'm going to be very vocal about the kinds of abuse that we can mitigate by just paying attention, but being more aware, but being more intentional, but being more mindful, that we protect ourselves in these kinds of situations that are taking place. That could be the perfect storm that I had to endure for a few years. That could be a lot to heal from moving forward. So that was what I wanted to come and talk about today. Some food for thought for you. We do have online courses that focus on leadership development on our website. We have courses for adults, we have courses for families as well. My background, I did 7 years of training development. My academic professional background is cognitive neuroscience. Technical communications, which I've done together, supported me in creating really strong training programs for sales, customer service, as well as executive leadership teams before I decided to make these leadership programs made accessible and available outside of the corporate arena. Because when you think about leadership competency, soft skills, and these kinds of self-mastery development focused learning, it really does broadly apply to everyone. And I think working in talent management, I learned very quickly that a lot of the things that we teach adults could have easily been taught when they were children. And when leveraging my background, I had a very special interest in developmental psychology as well as memory systems. I built these programs that cater to different age groups. So this is age appropriate. It aligns with their maturity and their development level as well. So that rather than us having to do these trainings to undo some of the damage that were done in adults who enter the workforce, we can have it as a foundation so that we're not dealing with the walking wounded in the workforce as adults, because this is training that we received at home. So that's some of what we're offering. We're actually also offering a free online course with a parent-child workshop. It's one of our starter workshops focusing on developing self-concept for children ages from 4 all the way to 18 in 3 separate modules. But for the free one, we're going to do sort of a group experience to give you a sense as to how the programs are run. If that is something you're interested in, we do have a link to the survey at the end of the survey. If you would like to pre-register, you can add your email, or you can find our email address and email us directly to get more information about the program that we are launching. It will be launched on Sunday, the 1st of February at 9 a.m. PST. So I wanted to come in here and give you that food for thought. If you're still here, then definitely follow us. Every follow definitely helps. Leave us a like, share across all of your social media platforms, and I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.